It's some kind of game show.
And there's video. There is video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want to come and say hello to everybody.
And who is this?
Oh, it's people around the world.
Oh my goodness.
They're listening. Yeah. So we're in Tempe, Arizona, which is part of the greater Phoenix area, right across the street from Arizona State University. And Jared, you're a student there?
Yes.
Jared is a student at Arizona State University. We have another nice couple here.
Alumni?
Alumni. Your name is?
Greg.
Greg and
Lisa.
Greg and Lisa, right? And Jared. And Radha Prana, who is leading the program with his wife, Anupama. So, this is great. Throat lost me. So, do you have any questions? Yeah, anybody.
Why are you here?
Can we, do you want to go on the air or would you rather not?
I've done many podcasts live.
Okay, so if you come a little closer, because otherwise it's a little hard to hear. Why don't we get rid of that?
No.
Okay, yeah. So,
Why are you visiting us here in beautiful Phoenix when it's almost 70 degrees out and people are frozen in New York and Boston? Why are you here?
not a snowbird. Why am I here in Phoenix? Because we have a center here, actually a few centers in the Phoenix area. And I am in a particular, you could say, spiritual religious order, in which it's my duty to travel and try to offer this knowledge. And so I thought I would, actually I am a snowbird, because I mean, there's a reason why I'm doing this right now in Phoenix and not Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a great pleasure to try to share Krishna consciousness with people.
And a great way from our experience is to be in Phoenix and also down in Tucson, which has an absolutely fantastic center.
I'm going there tomorrow.
Are you going there tomorrow?
Yeah.
And the restaurant there is called Govinda's, and we highly recommend for anyone who wants to travel to Arizona in the winter. Best food in the world. One of the best temples in the world. We go there many, many times. Beautiful spiritual place to eat spiritually.
Yeah, Sandamini, the leader, is a very old friend of mine. She's like a sister to me.
You calling her old?
Old friend.
Okay.
We're both young, and she's an old friend. So, any philosophical questions or historical, analytical, psychological? Did you have something?
I could just say that.
Do you want to go here?
Sure. That in general, I just feel a lot of pressure coming from the outside society to control me to live and look a certain way as I'm going through life. And this pressure that often causes me to think and changes my paradigm. I have paradigm shifts from this pressure. And that's currently what I'm experiencing a lot day to day. It's just living in a world where a lot of people are doing a lot of different things and combating each other, and also living in harmony at the same time.
It's very interesting. Okay, that's certainly a serious point. First thing, I guess, that occurs to me is you're right. I think, we live in a world in which there is tremendous pressure. Sorry, I think there's a very common term, the global village, and we've all heard about the global village. One thing people often forget is that there's no privacy in villages. And in villages, there is tremendous pressure to conform. And I mean, it's a truism that in America or any other country I've ever been to, that if you go to big cosmopolitan cities, you find a lot more diversity. And if you go to a small town, whether it's a small town in upstate New York or in, downstate Mississippi or even California, when you get less people together, there seems to be an inverse ratio. That the larger the population, the more diversity, and the smaller the population, the more pressure to conform. But what I wanted to say there is because nowadays we're creating this with technology, with surveillance video, which is everywhere, and the technology has recreated the psychological pressure of the village. So your generation, in a sense, is subject to all that pressure. You want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I feel it a lot more here in the city of Tempe and Phoenix, especially Phoenix. I feel that pressure more. I didn't really feel it as much as I did back in Michigan.
Oh, really? Where are you from in Michigan?
I'm from Milford, Michigan.
Oh, where's
So Milford is right around here, kind of south.
outside Detroit?
Yeah, outside of Detroit. And exactly, I didn't really feel it as much
Right.
before I came to.
Well, that's very
city.
interesting.
And it kind of makes me not like the city.
Not like Phoenix because of the pressure.
Yeah, and I live right next to construction, by the way.
Well, that'll make you happy.
Yeah.
What occurs to me is that people, I guess, feel pressure in different places because we're all different, and there could be all kinds of factors that contribute to that. So, I think the greatest antidote is to develop a very strong sense with authenticity, being real about it, not just as a technique, but really having a very strong sense of who you actually are
Yes.
and what your goals are, so that you have the courage and the confidence and the strength to pursue the life that you really want. And that's why, for example, we're here together sort of as a little community here tonight. And there's a Sanskrit term which is pretty common, satsanga, which means spiritual community or spiritual association. I remember when I was at Harvard, and I would sometimes visit the ISKCON temple in Boston, which is just over the bridge, over the Charles River. And when I would drive back, the bridge that goes right into Harvard Square has this old plaque on. There's a lot of old stuff in New England, but there's this plaque on the bridge that says the community of the wise is the welfare of the world, which I thought was really well said. The community of the wise is the welfare of the world. And so it's really been recognized in all spiritual traditions that those who are serious and sincere about achieving spirituality in their own life and helping others, they should and do form a natural community of natural support. So it's like in a team. Let's say you're playing some sport, it's a team sport. It's the team plays as a team, and we all know that there are the innumerable examples that a team can have a lot of all-stars, but they don't really play as a team, and therefore they lose to other teams. Maybe man for man or woman for woman are not as good, but they have a lot more teamwork, and therefore they win. And so as human beings, just the way we're wired neurologically, we're meant to live and work in communities, but there should be a community that we can really feel good about, and a community in which we really share the goals and we share the inspiration and the values. And so if we can discover a community like that, where our most noble aspirations and what we really want out of life for ourselves and others, to be with people, to associate with people that share those values and are encouraging us and we're encouraging them. So I think, I don't want to be an amateur psychologist here, but I think from what you described, it seems like a good spiritual community.
Yes. I felt like I was kind of raised in a good spiritual community.
Really?
Yes.
You mean your family or the larger community?
The larger community with friends in the general area who I went to school with and whatnot, and those people are still out there back in Michigan right now.
Well, you're very fortunate. And that helps me to understand more something else you said before, because Phoenix, like other cities like LA, it's a very hard driving, materialistic place. I was just in the Bay Area, and it was kind of it was too much. You talk about hard driving. Silicon Valley kind of ruined the Bay Area in the sense that it's just money, and it's but Phoenix it's growing, it's ambitious, it's hard driving, and really focused on material goals. And so if you came from a smaller place with good people around you, then I can understand why you're feeling the way you do.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes,
Shubham is another age
Shivam.
to Shubham.
Shubham.
Yes.
Oh, that means you're good.
That's right.
So, did you have any?
Yeah, I was reading through the email.
Here, you can ask your question.
Uh,
You want to come and ask your question?
sure.
You have to come a little closer so people can hear you.
Okay.
This is Shubham.
Hey, hi, hello. So, my question is kind of like very general. It's like when do you realize that you are on the right path in spirituality? What is the when do you realize that okay, this is working?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a very good question. A spiritual path, I mean, just first of all, think more generally than just the notion of path. The path is supposed to lead somewhere. Of course, if you're just meandering just out like you're in one of those moods, no, I just want to get lost in the forest and have a good time, and eventually they'll send in the helicopters. But I mean, if you're not just wandering around, but you're actually going somewhere, it's directional in that sense of being on a path, then presumably you're on that path because you hope to achieve certain goals. And for example, when I drove from California out to Phoenix, I had the goal of arriving in Phoenix. And because I know the geography and topography fairly well from too many drives, I could see that, we're getting closer to Arizona, and now we crossed the line, and so on a path, you should have certain goals. Of course, let's say, being on a path is not the same thing as just being in a religion, let's say. Because what happens in every religion, it seems, is that a lot of people, or else most people, kind of, and I really mean without exception, that most people sort of lose that noble ambition that I want to achieve higher consciousness, I want to know God, I want to, like George Harrison, that great song, I really want to know you, I really want to go with you. And so I think George really expressed it very well. So if it just becomes, okay, this is my religion, and I'm not particularly trying to get somewhere, I just want to be in good standing with my community, and I know I should do this, so I'm doing it, so I feel good about myself, as opposed to really having noble but ambitious goals. I want to come to higher consciousness. Like George said, I want to know you. I really want to know God. And so if you are really on a path and not just kind of hovering or just sort of, hanging out in some religion, but you're really on a path, then you're trying to get somewhere, and you can see, am I getting there? I want to see certain changes in myself. I want to be in a higher consciousness. I want to free myself from certain bad habits that aren't really helping me. I would like to really associate with people that can help me in a serious way, and not just engage in frivolous association and so on. And so if you have these spiritual goals, which are pretty much universal in most spiritual paths, then you measure, am I getting there? Am I benefiting? And if you see that you're not really getting to where you want to go, there are two possibilities. Number one, this actually isn't the path. I need to call the spiritual AAA or something, or get a better GPS, or maybe I'm not practicing as seriously as I should. Maybe I have to be more serious about moving on this path and actually progressing. And of course, sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. So I know what I wanted. I was mentioned before in the last class, this is like, I guess, for the people out there who are on Facebook who are watching both the classes, it's kind of like an I Love Lucy moment, rerun. But I had reached a point when I was 19 years old. I was a student at Berkeley, had a scholarship at Berkeley, I had lots of friends, and I had a good family. So I wasn't looking for religion as a way to fill a material void or some emotional thing. Or my material life was actually, it's fine. But I wanted to know the highest truth. I wanted to know God, or whatever, the absolute truth. And also I came to the explicit conclusion. I mean, I had this moment, I had this epiphany. I was on the Berkeley campus, if you know the Bear Lair. Anyway, it's just this sort of the student professor restaurant near the free speech area. I was watching all these people walking around. I had this vision that this is just a sophisticated intellectual form of animal life. Because animals basically, pursue their bodily needs and selfish interest, defense, feeding, reproducing. And I thought, that's really what's going on here. It's just a bunch of selfish people running around, some of them pretending they know a lot about life. And so then I went to Europe. My older brother went to Europe, and so I had to go to Europe. So I made my summer tour. It was University of California charter flight. Flew into Amsterdam, and I thought maybe in Europe I'll find some higher way of life. And after going all over Europe, from the Arctic Circle to North Africa, I was mentioning, surviving a motorcycle crash in a Greek island. The motorcycle bounced into this gully, and I literally lost consciousness. And when I came to, I was hanging onto a cliff. And just all kinds of adventures. And as I was nearing the end of my tour, I was keeping a little journal. And I concluded that Europe, no offense to my friends in Europe, but that Europe was just sort of an older, more historical, culturally sophisticated version of the same animalism I found in California. And therefore, it wasn't Europe, it had to be something else. And so I was on a train going from Malaga back to Madrid to catch a train to Paris. And I wrote in my journal that when I get back to Berkeley, I have to stay in school because of the Vietnam War, and dropping out of college was not an option. And I decided my project was going to be to try to understand God. I mean, by God, I didn't mean necessarily any sectarian idea. By that, I meant the highest truth, just whatever is the ultimate truth behind all of this. And I think not to look for an ultimate truth is really to abandon the whole project of philosophy and rationality, because you're always trying to reduce things to their simplest expression and find the one equation that explains all equations. And anyway, there's the Greek, going back to the Greeks, their discovery of generalization and categorization as a means of rationalizing the world. So anyway, so I got back to Berkeley, and somehow or other I kept that vow I made to myself. And I remember every day when I got up and walked to the campus, I was really trying to understand, who am I? What is God? Why am I here? I really was, and then in the midst of that intense searching, Prabhupada came to our university. And I didn't think so highly of Indian Swamis because I'd gone to hear one Swami speak a year or two before. It was an assignment in a sociology class with Professor Zablowski. And so, and the Swami that spoke, he didn't really say anything. He just kept saying, relax, everything is all right. There's no problem. I literally almost burst out laughing. In fact, people around me were starting to get offended. So, I was like 18 years old. And so So I thought, is this another Swami? The devotees invited me to come and hear their guru speak. And so I walked into the auditorium, and Prabhupada came in, and as soon as he walked into the room, I could just see this is very different. Because in those days, and we didn't trust the government, we didn't trust our teachers, our parents. We loved them, but they didn't really understand. They didn't even understand that the Vietnam War was evil. And so, but when Prabhupada walked in, I could see this person actually has real authority. He was different. He just seemed to me like a commander. And then he spoke, and then then I realized that that this really actually is a spiritual path. And I wasn't fanatical. I respected every person I met who I felt in their own way was sincerely trying to serve or understand God. I gave them great respect. I was never, I think, a religious fanatic by nature. But I understood that here's a real spiritual science. That's what I want, a spiritual science. And so here I am 50 years later, actually almost 60 years, 51 years later, which means I joined the movement 2 years before I was born. Just joking. So, and so in one sense, if you've been doing something a very long time, maybe you've advanced, or maybe you become very sort of negligent. Because if you think about it, when you repeat something over and over again, two things happen. Number one, you become really good at it. But they say, I could do that in my sleep, which means that sometimes you really are kind of mentally asleep while you're doing it. And so repetition, practice by repetition, it makes you good at something, but also you can stop paying attention to it. And so you see people who've been practicing, say, Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness for a long time. You can become good at it, but you can also become kind of sleepwalking through it. And you've forgotten that you're actually on a path. You're trying to find the truth. And what I sometimes tell devotees is that, because you have all these stories. We have a magazine called Back to Godhead that we used to read. And anyway, it's they used to have this genre, these articles like How I Came to Krishna Consciousness. And it was, they were interesting stories. Like I was searching for the truth. I was searching for God. That would be a very common thing. And they were interesting stories, sincere people. But so what I say is, okay, I was searching for God and I joined a movement, but I'm still searching for God in the sense that I'm still trying to advance in my understanding. I'm still trying to come to a higher realization. And so it's not that, okay, I was searching, then I found a truth, I joined, and now I can do other things. But it's really a lifelong journey. It's a lifelong path of trying to understand in a deeper and deeper way, trying to come closer and closer to Krishna. And so in that sense, if you remember that you're on a path, you don't just belong to a religion, then you're checking yourself. It's like athletes that are, let's say, training for the advanced competition, Olympics or World Cup or whatever, Super Bowl. I mean, they're constantly, they time themselves. They have all this technology now, like what's my heartbeat rate? What's my heart rate? How many calories did I burn? And this and that, and the muscle density. And my God, it's like I knew the world had a problem, because I remember when I used to teach at the University of Florida, and I used to live there also. And I remember one time I went into the bookstore. I was looking for a philosophy book, because I was doing a Western philosophy project, and I was looking over, where are the philosophy books? And I found there's one little shelf of philosophy books, which is absolutely overwhelmed by a whole wall. I mean, it was just next an entire wall of books for physical education courses. And so I thought, that's Florida. So if you really remember that you're on a path, and don't just go into this unconscious cruising mode.
So is it okay to expect a reward from the path? I'm from India, so I read the stories, I do know you get behavioral changes. For beginners who's impatient, the least expectation is I'll become calm, I'll become peaceful, I'll be really good. But what's after that? There are stories, the end goal is like the people. The story is like you close your eyes and you see something, you experience the bliss. Is it okay to explain?
That was really a great description of sort of apathetic religion. Okay, the goal is to really come back to who you really are, because if you understand that you are a spiritual being, you are an eternal soul who somehow are trapped in a world in which you have to enter into these bodies and then have death experiences. And so it's like, let's say you're homesick and you want to get back. Let's say you've been traveling and going here and there, and maybe even went to jail in some foreign country, and finally you're free and all you want to do is get back home. So I'd say that's the real mood of Krishna consciousness: back to your loving family, back to your real life. And so Prabhupada used this expression, back to home, back to Godhead. It's interesting how he used the word Godhead. Godhead is actually originally a term in Christian theology. And that's because it got so complicated with the Trinity and this and that and the other thing, that it was sort of a word which means, the entire package. And so because we know Krishna can expand himself, Ram and Vishnu and so on, so Prabhupada used that word Godhead, but it's going back to your real home. It's going back to your real life, to your pure consciousness, your real happiness. And as I explained in the last segment, I feel like I'm on TV, the last segment, that we can't be the body. It's not possible, based on what we know, that we are the body. Because at the deepest level, Descartes pointed this out, that it's interesting that in the 1600s, when they had the scientific revolution at Descartes, Sir Francis Bacon kind of rediscovered what we now call a scientific method. But there was another philosopher, Descartes, who was also a great scientist, which is often forgotten. People just remember his substance dualism, but he was actually a great scientist whose discoveries are still being used, even in technology. But Bacon said the way you understand the world is that you systematically study it through what we now call the empirical method. Descartes said something else. He wasn't denying the validity of empiricism, but he said that whatever you study, you do through your consciousness. Unconscious people don't make good scientists. And so therefore, he said, the real center of your knowledge is consciousness itself. And so therefore, we should try to understand ourselves. We should go in. We should go within. It's kind of a yoga thing. That the most important truth we find not by going out into the world, but by going within ourselves. And that's when he said, if I doubt everything, is there something I cannot doubt? Is there something I cannot be skeptical about? And he said, yes. He said, cogito ergo sum. The fact that I'm asking this question means that I'm conscious, and if I'm conscious, I exist. Because if I didn't exist, how could I even ask the question? So if you're trying to find out so as far as being the body, all of us, I believe, at one time were 3 years old or 5 years old or 6 or 7, and yet that was you. If you talk about your childhood, you say, yeah, when I was a little kid, it was you. When I was a little kid, it wasn't someone else. And then when you were a teenager, the fact is, it's not the same body. The body's different. This example, by the way, Krishna gives in the Gita. Just as in this body, the embodied soul experiences childhood, adolescence, and then old age. So the body's not just changing, but actually becoming something else. That's actually the main point of Buddhism, at least in the original Buddhism as taught by the Buddha, that their shunyavad, their sense of voidism, they don't mean that nothing exists. That's not, they explicitly don't mean that. What they mean is, in the shunyavad of Buddhism, is that you cannot point to any object in the world and say it is just that thing, because the next moment it's already changed. And by the way, these ideas were not just in India. For example, there's a very famous pre-Socratic philosopher named Heraclitus, who was a contemporary of Buddha, and who taught that you cannot step in the same river twice, because the second step, it's a different river. Some of the water is poured out wherever the water, the mouth of the river is, and there's new water coming, so you can't step in the same river twice, which is very Buddhist. And my version of that is that you can't breathe in the same body twice. And yet, in contrast to this perpetual flux and transformation of material things, you, despite all the changes, are the same person. You were the 3-year-old, the 5-year-old, the, whatever, 9, 11, 14 and a half. It was you. It's the same person. At the deepest level, it was actually you. And so you have a body which is constantly changing, and then there's you, who's always the same, hence, you're not the body. So therefore, philosophers, whether it's Greco-Roman philosophers or philosophers in India or in other parts of the world, they've asked this question, who am I? And that question was suggested in the Greek world, ancient Greek world. There was an island called Delphi, which is still there. And there was an oracle there. There would always be a priestess who was said to be able to communicate with the god Apollo, Surya. Was able to, and people would go there from all over the Greek world, and they would ask questions to Apollo through the priestess, and then she would channel the response of the god. And so there was a motto inscribed there at that temple, that famous temple of Delphi, which was "Know thyself." And so, at least in Western civilization, it kind of comes from that, know thyself. And so Krishna conscious means to know who we really are. And of course, when we find out who we are, it's certainly not the body. That's absurd, because the body is always changing. But we also don't know ourselves in isolation, because we're part of something greater. We are born into a world where there's a lot going on. Like there's a whole universe out there in our planet. They talk now, one of the arguments against accidental or purely naturalistic evolution, not only of species, but also even of just life in general, that there could be life at all, is that the conditions on Earth are sort of impossibly against the odds, ideally suited to produce life according to the known laws of nature. And so we're part of a huge ecosystem, what's left of it. And so therefore, to know yourself means know everyone else. Because you can't know, because if you look at other people, it's not that you are not your body, but she is or he is. And so, and Krishna gives the example in the Gita, he said, knowledge is like the sun. So what does he mean? He says, Suryavat Jnanam. Knowledge which is like the sun. When the sun rises, it illumines everything simultaneously and equally. Like if the sun rises in your neighborhood, everything is illumined simultaneously and equally. And so when you achieve self-realization, when you begin to understand yourself, you understand everyone else. When you begin to perceive yourself as a spiritual being within the body, you start to perceive everyone else the same way. There's no such thing as just local self-realization. Either the sun is rising or it's not rising. So and ultimately, if you ask the question, how do I exist? I'll raise here the famous philosophical argument for God, or for something like a God, which is the argument from contingency. Contingency, of course, just means dependence. Like if someone says, are you coming? And I say it's contingent, meaning it depends on something else. So everything that we can experience in the world, everything that we can experience by our own senses or through the extension of our senses through microscopes and telescopes and so on, and by pure reasoning. Everything that we can experience in the world depends on something else for its existence. For example, you have a body because you have parents. And even if you study astronomy, you know that stars come from something else. And so everything in the universe is contingent on something else. And so therefore the question is, someone could say, well, maybe it's just solid state theory, it's just always existed, but that's not the real question. The real question is, why does anything exist? Because we can imagine, at least we could imagine the possibility that nothing ever existed. And yet we know that a lot of things exist. And so, but if everything depends on something else, how did anything ever come to exist? And the philosophical answer is that there has to be a non-contingent being. There has to be a being that does not depend on other things for its existence. And by the way, this, of course, is Aristotle's argument. Aristotle was not the most religious guy in the world. He was more, the science thing. But in Aristotle's term, a non-contingent being, for Aristotle, is the unmoved mover, which is basically the same argument. We see that everything is moved by something else. So there must be an unmoved mover, something which precedes all dependent beings. And so if you understand that, then to really understand yourself and how you exist at all, and who had the power to put you in illusion, who had the power to put you in a body, who had the power to create human bodies which are almost infinitely more complex than our most advanced computers. I mean, if you say that, like I was mentioning in the last class, that there's a revolution going on in microbiology for the last few decades, because Darwin, when he made his theory, had a certain concept of biological complexity. And then, of course, that concept became refined, and scientists discovered actually it's much more complex than that. But lately now, they're discovering that it's like exponentially more sophisticated, more complex than we ever imagined. I mean, they have cells have motors in them. It's like little motors. There are transportation delivery systems which appear to be somewhat digital within cells. It's like it's ridiculous in what they're finding now at the level of microbiology. It's ridiculous. It's crazy how complex it is. And so more and more the idea that it's just the wind blew, the sun shone, there was seismic activity, and you get these ridiculously, impossibly sophisticated supercomputers that reproduce. I mean, my little Mac Air here does not reproduce. I have to buy another one eventually. It's just reproduction itself. That you have these machines that actually go to each other and actually produce, in theory, forever. They can produce an infinite number of other models. It's to say that this just happened by laws of nature, things bouncing around, is striking more and more scientists and philosophers as idiotic. And which it is, of course. And so therefore, if you want to understand yourself, you have to understand where you come from. That's the first statement of Brahma Sutra, Vedanta Sutra, Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Well, first statement is we should try to understand the absolute, not just relative things. And then Janmadhyasya Jataha, the absolute is that which is the source of everything. So I don't know about you, but personally, I find great ideas pleasing. I mean, that's the kind of life I think I always wanted, where you use your God-given intelligence, you try to understand great things, you try to understand yourself, know thyself, as it was said in Temple of Apollo in Delphi. And so if someone says, well, that's nice, but I'm not really interested in knowing who I ultimately am, where it all comes from, okay. But then in a sense, what we're dealing with is a sort of a sophisticated form of animal life, where, if I'm concerned, like you go in these areas, these flights, you get these airline magazines that try to glamorize like eating and just sleep in this hotel, the animal propensities, and it's just, well, I won't say the obvious here. There's this great proverb in Sanskrit, ahara nidra bhayamaitunang cha samanyametat pasubhi narana dharmehi tesham adhiko vishesha dharmena hina pasubhi samana. Very interesting. That means in Sanskrit that as far as ahara, eating, nidra, sleeping, bhaya, defending oneself, and maitunam, and sex, samanyameta, this is the quality, pasubhi narana, of human beings with animals. Human beings and animals are equal in that respect. In fact, some of the animals have far, far greater sexual prowess. They can really just go all night. And so, and in terms of eating, and so it's not that human beings are superior to animals in these functions. But the proverb says, dharmehi tesham. It is in dharma. It is in the ability to discover the ultimate laws of the universe and where they come from. Adhiko vishesha, that is the specific or distinguishing vishesha. That is the distinguishing superiority of human beings. Therefore, dharmena hina pasubhi samana. People who are devoid of this, or who lack this interest and understanding all these things, they're equal to animals. So one last little point on this topic, and that is actually the idea that philosophical materialism is the natural sort of worldview of empiric science is, of course, philosophically absurd. And most of the great scientific discoveries were done by religious people. For example, Copernicus discovered the heliocentric solar system because he was inspired by religious ideas from Plato and Christianity. The idea that Plato talks about the sun. If you know Plato, he talks about the sun as God and the center. You know, it's a symbol you find all around the world. The sun is a symbol of light, hence of knowledge, of energy. And so inspired by religious ideas, he thought, well, since God made the world, it should be the sun. And there's a very long list. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of the greatest scientists who ever lived who actually had this religious idea in various forms. And if you go all the way back to Greco-Roman times, they had, among intellectuals, they had this popular philosophy, which was sort of logos philosophy. Logos, from which we get the word logic, from which we get all the ologias like physiology, biology, geology. That's all logos. It's the logos, a rational account of a particular area. And so this logos philosophy in the classical world was that God is ultimately a supremely rational being. You know, not just jealous, not just angry, not just suffering, but actually a supremely and infinitely rational being. And this divine reason within the mind of God, they call the logos. And since God created the world, that logos is everywhere in the universe. It's within our minds. And it's within the creation, it's within nature. And therefore, using our own logos, our own divine reason, we can discover that same reason, that same lawfulness, that same logic in the natural world. And it was this idea that led to the scientific revolution. Because imagine an alternative. What if it was the case that the world is hopelessly chaotic, it's not lawful, and even if there were laws, were made in such a way that we can't discover them, and the true nature of the universe is chaos, irregularity, non-uniformity, unlawfulness, And therefore, you can never really safely generalize because there are no universal laws. You need universal facts to sustain generalizations. And therefore, don't waste your time studying the universe because you can't solve chaos. And so instead, the idea of a lawful universe, even the principle of uniformity in empiric science, that we can receive, as we do, light rays, let's say, from billions of miles away, and yet we are justified in drawing conclusions by passing that light through our prisms and reading how the light breaks down, and we can tell what kinds of gases the light pass through, and how far away its source and everything. That's basically what astronomers do nowadays. They analyze light. And so, but what if the laws of nature are different? What if other parts of the galaxy have a completely different set of natural laws? And so this belief in uniformity, this belief in regularity, this belief in lawfulness in the physical world actually comes from the idea of a rational creator. So that's what we're supposed to be doing as human beings.
You have a question?
I have a question.
Please. Oh, put you on the air here. You want no makeup?
My name is Greg, and my question to you is kind of playing a devil's advocate a little bit.
Oh boy.
Great. So what? I have a car. I have a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful daughters. I have health insurance. I have a job. I have a good education. We live in a great country. Yeah, there's a God. I grant you that. And I pray to him. But why do I even have to worry about all the stuff you just talked about? Things are great.
Okay. Hey, who let this guy in? Okay, so
He keeps challenging the word, Prabhupada's word, miserable.
no, it's okay. Granted all that you said, not the question, but the describing the facts of your life. And even in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, those blessings you have would be seen as blessings and as a sign of your own virtue in this life or the next life. In other words, it's not for nothing that you receive these blessings. So I would say the reason we should be concerned about the other stuff that I was talking about is because otherwise we are clearly remaining in an infantile state of consciousness. If you think of, let's say, child behavior, the young little child, which you raise your daughters, you basically give to them and they take what you give them. You feed them. This little infant obviously can't feed itself, so you have to feed them. You have to take care of them and bathe them and protect them in so many ways. You have to educate them. And if a child, having received all of that from the parents, grows up and feels no gratitude, no interest in the parents, like just keep those checks coming. I guess maybe now it's PayPal or something. I'm dating myself, but so a child that takes so much from loving parents, feels no gratitude, has no desire to reciprocate. I know myself, I can say that with my own parents that were both passed away, but I had very good parents, very loving parents, not exactly members of the Hare Krishna movement, but nonetheless very good parents. And I've been finding actually for many, many years now, that the older I get, the more grateful I feel. And so I would say if you are developing as a soul, your gratitude increases toward the ultimate funding source. And with gratitude, with love comes that you want to know that person. You want to know more about that person. I know I had 2 brothers who are living. One passed away many years ago, and I know they've everyone, every so often they'll send around email like, I just found this, like a picture of our parents, or I didn't know this about them. Or I mean, to give an example, my mother was really very intelligent, and she, of course, when she grew up, she couldn't go to college. The Depression, she couldn't go to college because there was only enough money for one. There were three daughters, only one could go to college, so she had to work. So her older sister could go to college. And my father also, just, people didn't go to college as commonly as they do now back then. And so she was a high school graduate. And at one point they sort of fell on hard times. We were always sort of like middle class, but then at a certain point they fell on hard times. And later they actually became very wealthy beyond anything they'd imagined. But so she got a job at UCLA in the medical school, the lowest job they had, because she had no experience in the typing pool. And she was so bright that within a couple of years, she was actually the director of the pediatric ward and received an award as the best of the entire staff at UCLA Medical School. She got I think for the whole UCLA, like top Bruin and when she was, had to go to assisted living and whatever, I was helping to clean out some of her papers and things with my brothers. And I discovered something I never knew, that when she retired and they had to hire 4 people to replace her, that she got a letter from the dean of the medical school, long letter full of gratitude. And she was like really good friends with the dean. She got a letter from the chancellor of UCLA. She got a letter from the president of the University of California and from the governor. And she never mentioned this. And like I said, she, just finished high school. And so I was really pleased to, learn that stuff, which I never knew. And so when you love someone, or you learn to love someone, it's fun to know about them, to know more about them. And you remember that old song, "To Know Him Is to Love Him"? Do you know Teddy Bears?
I know that song.
Phil Spector actually wrote that. You can find it on YouTube, and he's the sort of the skinny guy with a guitar.
Mm.
But anyway, so I think it's natural when you begin to realize that someone is the source of all my blessings, and to want to know more about that person, to develop affection and love, and I would say even on a different level, I think it's my nature that I have a very strong drive to understand where I am. Like if I go someplace, I want to know where I am. I want to know exactly, I just want to understand. I want to know. I don't like ignorance. Like if suddenly the lights go out and we're in darkness, I don't find that to be particularly pleasing. I want to put the lights back on. And I know that in Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, one of the things they do for paying customers is they take people down this train very, deep into the caverns, and then they turn the lights out, and there's a darkness that we've actually never experienced. Because, there's all what astronomers call light pollution. I mean, there's just so much light in our world, and they gasp and they scream, because they've never experienced that degree of darkness. And so, you should know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So I think knowledge is liberating. And if it gets back to the old philosophical question of truth and beauty, is the truth beautiful, and is the beautiful true? And of course, from our perspective, yes, that the truth is beautiful, and beautiful things, they're truly beautiful, are true. And so I think our natural aesthetic impulses to be drawn to beauty, to be drawn to harmony, to be drawn by a great understanding. And that's why people climb mountains, because you look down and you see what you could never see before. You see your city for the first time. And so this natural attraction of knowledge, of understanding, of beauty, of and all the drive of gratitude, of wanting to understand the person who really deserves your first love. I think those are all excellent reasons that would motivate someone to try to learn this.
May I ask a follow-up?
You certainly may. 2 for the price of 1.
2 for the price. So it sounds to me like you're saying there's more to my life than just my own willpower, my own drive to succeed, my own acquisition of cars and homes, and that it's not all about me and my pushing through society to grab whatever I possibly can for my own comfort, that I should have blessings and be concerned about where some of this came from. Is there more out there than just my own effort?
Funny you should ask that. Yes, there certainly is. Because, for example, you didn't choose your birth. Although in one sense, you'd say maybe a result of karma, but it was something given to you. And as we know, when you have kids, it is a type of biological Russian roulette. Because sometimes very good, loving parents come up with some unusual creatures. And so so when parents are blessed to have good children, loving children, or the children are blessed with health, and of course not that you love them less if they're not healthy, but still, to have good children is just, it's such a blessing. It's something you can't do by yourself. It has to be given to you. And so, and actually, it's interesting, studies show, because they're doing all kinds of studies now, positive psychology. Penn, University of Pennsylvania, nice Ivy League school, they have a whole program or department in positive psychology. And so I think, what was his name? Oh my God, he was a professor at Brandeis, actually. He started this whole positive psychology thing, and he was really well known in the 60s. We were all reading his book. Maslow, I think his name was. I don't remember the tribe. So,
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
yeah. So,
He's the smart one.
doesn't look Jewish.
We're not these bodies,
Could come back and just wrap
I'll tell you later. So we are so dependent. No man is an island. Society, we are nowadays, of course, live in an age which glorifies narcissism, and now we have the narcissist in chief. But actually, there's a balance. We are individuals, but we are also members of groups. We are private, we are public. And as we know, you couldn't even acquire speech. And it's very, very questionable how much you could think if you didn't have a language, because we tend to think verbally. And so, the fact that you can walk out the door and, someone doesn't just kill you, which is, it's very likely, the odds are very small that something, when you walk out the door, that'll happen. It's because we live in society. The fact that, the social contract, for example, let's say you're driving your car, say you're going 40 miles an hour and you see a green light, so you just keep going. You are placing your life, you are staking your life on the social contract, that the people going the other way will respect the red light, or that the people in charge of maintaining the traffic lights working properly have done their job. They're not sabotaged. They haven't been just neglected. And so every time you drive your car, every time you walk down the street, you are staking your life on the social contract that other people are going to, follow the contract they signed up for. And so there's no such thing as just, purely individual life. It doesn't exist. A human baby is put in the forest or wherever, I guess here it'd be in the desert. A human baby is just put somewhere and perhaps fed. I mean, if you take a human baby and just maybe feed it, protect it, but don't really give it community, the baby will just, practically be like a vegetable. So we are as much social as we are individual. We are as much public as we are private. And obviously our society has gone way over to the side of sort of a false individualism, because the amount of conformity nowadays is unbelievable. I mean, you experienced that. That was the point you were making. That, in a city or in a society which prides itself on individualism, actually the degree of conformity is actually quite a lot. In California, there's a very clear, highly regimented way to be a free thinker. And as soon as you stray even slightly from the norms of free thinking, they'll kill you, at least socially. So, so it's a question of balance, really being yourself, knowing yourself, pursuing a life which is authentic for you, and at the same time remembering and paying your social obligations and ultimately your obligations to God. So the idea that why shouldn't I just do what I want, because first of all, it's criminal. I mean, if people really just did what they wanted, like you're sexually attracted to someone, okay, get out your club, bonk them on the head, drag them back to your cave. If people really just do what they want, we just have barbarism, savagery. One of my favorite nonsensical sayings is that we shouldn't impose our values on others. Every time you put up a traffic light, you put up a traffic light, it's a trade-off, security versus freedom. No traffic light, you get the freedom just to go when you want. Traffic light, less freedom, more security. Every law, every English sentence which contains the auxiliary verb should or must is a value judgment and a metaphysical claim. I saw this, the reason I discovered, what got me thinking about this, like lunacy of don't impose your values. I mean, you shouldn't impose them inappropriately, but what happened is in Minnesota, they were trying to curb pornography because children were becoming, damaged by it and everything. And so therefore in Minnesota, they passed this serious or stiff anti-pornography law. And what happened is they phrased the law, the language of the law was phrased in such a way that an art book in one of the leading museums in Minneapolis somehow violated the law. And so, I mean, a lot of people realize, well, there's something wrong. We have to maybe rephrase the law or something. But they were interviewing this guy, sophisticated guy who was the head of the museum, and he actually said, we shouldn't impose our values on others. And what I thought was so comical about this is that's exactly what he's doing. His value is that we shouldn't impose our values on others. And he was insisting that value be made into law. And if you really don't want to impose your values on others, then we have to immediately roll back, for example, all the laws against rape, murder, theft, because those laws are imposing values. Namely, you shouldn't kill other people, you shouldn't rape other people, you shouldn't steal from other people. So there's no such thing as not imposing values. As far as who should impose the values, well, in fact, every society does, every community does. And are they the right values? If they have a law that says, let's say you can't drive at 70 miles an hour in a school zone, and you enforce the law, you are imposing your values, namely that children shouldn't be run down by crazy drivers. But that's a value judgment. It's a correct value judgment, but nonetheless a value judgment. So the idea that we shouldn't impose our values is just like it's one of the most amazing examples of nonsense that I've ever heard in my life. The question is, what are the right values? What? Okay, we're triple dipping here.
That's a lengthy explanation. You've convinced me that I need to be thankful and have a lot of gratitude and be more conscious that there's other things other than me, and be more conscious that there is some sort of a God or higher power that plays a role in my life. I wish there was some way for me to have a better conscious connection with God that isn't so complicated, a simple way, something that I could practice at home, some sort of improvement to my conscious contact with God. Suggestions?
Well, funny you should say that. We have a number of fine products here. But wait, call today. Yes, Bhakti Yoga. Honk if you like Bhakti Yoga. The thing is that we are not inviting any of you to be guinea pigs, in the sense that Bhakti Yoga, basically as we're presenting it, has been practiced by many, many, many millions of people for thousands of years with great success. And so it's certainly passed the test of time with, what do they say, flying colors. So take the Maha Mantra, the great mantra, Hare Krishna. Hare, it begins, it's actually a lady's first mantra, because Hare is an appeal to the feminine aspect of the absolute truth. And Krishna, of course, is masculine. And then Rama means the source of all pleasure. God is the source of all happiness, true pleasure. So there's a statement in our tradition, a Sanskrit statement, that abheda tvam nama namino, that the name of God actually is God, in the sense that God is not merely sound, but that God is fully present in the name. When I was at UCLA ages ago, I wrote an essay on the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, temple built by Solomon, envisioned by David and then built by Solomon. And what I found startling and was that throughout that section of the Old Testament that talks about the desire to build the temple, the plans to build it, the actual construction, the grand opening, and throughout that, it's emphasized repeatedly that it is a temple built to the name of God. And it said, just as God lives in heaven, so he lives by his name in the temple. It was a temple to the name of God. And when my mother passed away, I spoke at her funeral, and of course, it was a Jewish service. And what I did is I looked at the translation of the mourner's Kaddish, the prayer that's recited for the departed. And I looked at the translation of it, because my Hebrew is not fluent, although I can still read the letters. And I was actually I found it very surprising, interesting, and that there are two main topics in that mourner's prayer. Number one is the glory of God's name, the power of God's name. And the second topic was the earnest desire that all the people of the world, not just one community, but all the people of the world, receive the mercy of God. And of course, it's very famous. It's often been noted by Jewish scholars that the Kaddish prayer says nothing about lamentation or mourning. It rather is a very positive thing. It talks about the glory of God's name and the wish that all the people, all the nations of the earth, be blessed by God. And I know that when I was at my nephew's bar mitzvah, I was asked to say something. I mean, to recite one part of the prayer. So I got Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed is the holy name of God, the holy name forever and ever. And so this idea that God is present in His name, it's certainly in the Old Testament. It's in the New Testament. It's in Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, that the name is the holy figure. It's actually found throughout religions. The power, and so the idea here is that because God is absolute, the name of God is actually also God. It's a manifestation of God. In fact, the Sanskrit term is nama rupa, in the form of the name, the form of God as his or her own name, because we have Radha Krishna. And so the absolute truth has a masculine and feminine aspect, because it would be a very dull spiritual world indeed, right? If without that, I remember one time when I was living in Miami many years ago, and Miami Beach actually, and I read the Miami Herald, this little article I something caught my eye, that they had discovered a new Dead Sea Scroll, which was confusing the scholars because it explicitly talked about God and his consort. So the idea here is that there is, I mean, in many species of life, and even beyond material species, there is a masculine principle, there's a feminine principle, and as the French say, vive la différence, long live the difference. So there is actually, in a good man and a good woman, there is a type of sort of perfect complementarity. There is something seriously missing if it's only men or if it's only women. And so this sort of perfect complementarity is actually found in the absolute truth. And so that male and female in some ways define our world because they exist in the absolute. And there is a supreme male and supreme female principle, and together they are actually the absolute truth. Which, I mean, I have such great memories of my, adolescent parties when we were actually very innocent. Back in those days, we were actually sort of ladies and gentlemen, certainly compared to nowadays. And but I remember being young and the friendship between the boys and the girls, especially because we weren't engaging in, at a young age, we weren't engaging in sexual relations. And I remember just this deep affection and friendship. And so when I heard that the spiritual world is just this eternal middle school party, I thought, where do I sign? And so the Maha Mantra is that it's Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, so on. So it's the complete absolute truth with the male and female aspects, which are the source. Those truths are the source of our world. And in a sense, that's why romantic love is so powerful in our world, and of course often leads to suffering because people have false expectations. But romantic love is so powerful because ultimately it's who we are. Ultimately, we are souls who are meant to experience romantic love, both to relish it, to admire it in the highest being and ourselves. So that Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, it's I think it's great. Krishna, by the way, the word Krishna is etymologized within the tradition as first the word Krish, which means to attract. It's like a verbal root, which means to attract, to pull. Think of, for example, why these two words are so similar. Traction, like a tractor pulling something, and attraction. Traction and attractive. And because, same thing in German, Ziehung and Anziehung. So, because attraction is mental traction, something that pulls your mind. So, Krish means that God is most attractive. And Na is considered an abbreviation of the Sanskrit verbal root Nand, which means to experience pleasure, as in the word ananda, which is just none with a prefix, ananda, which means intense pleasure. So Krishna means that he's all attractive and the source of pleasure. And Rama, I won't go into all the Sanskrit grammar here, the causative form of the noun, but take my word for it, that Rama actually means source of pleasure. In fact, there's a verse in the tradition, Ramante yogi no anante, that the yogis or the spiritual practitioners, what it means there. It doesn't mean, people in their local yoga salon, but it means spiritual practitioners enjoy in the infinite. They find pleasure in the infinite. So Ramante yogino anante satyanande, in the pleasure of truth. Because as we know, you can enjoy a lie. One great example is, anyone else here, a big Jane Austen fan? Is it just me?
Jane Austen. You were supposed to read Jane Austen, but
Oh,
you didn't.
anyway, so one of her books, which is Mansfield Park, at the
You
end,
compare that to Bhagavad Gita.
what's that? Yeah, I gave a talk
I
on that.
read Mansfield.
Yeah, I gave a talk on that actually in the village hall, just 2 or 3 doors down from her house, but where she wrote the books. But at the end, the hero of the story, who's Edward Bertram, or is it Edmund? Edmund Bertram, finally recognizes the heroine, Fanny Price, is the girl that he really does love and should love, and that he was attracted to this other girl who was very beautiful and sophisticated, but basically amoral, which is not acceptable in Jane Austen's world. And because something happens and she just sort of reveals herself as not being an evil person, but she's sort of brought up in an unfortunate way, and she really just has no moral compass. Even when it involves great suffering to the family of the man who thinks he loves her, she has no moral compass, even about his own family. And then he has this realization, I think he says to her, that I loved an image of you that I had in my mind. Of course, everyone's had this experience, but I loved an image of you. And now that I see who you actually are, we really are not meant for each other. And so that idea of loving an image, but that's, for example, one can think that I'm the life of the party. But, in other words, you can have all kinds of ideas, vain ideas about yourself, which aren't really true. And so your pleasure is not based on truth. It's based on a misunderstanding of reality, like self-centeredness. So it said Satyanande, that the spiritual practitioners enjoy in the bliss of what is true. So Ramante Yogino Anante Satyanande Chiratmani Iti, therefore, Rama Padena Sao Param Brahma Vidhite, therefore the absolute truth is called by the name Rama. Because if you know Sanskrit, you know that Rama means a source of pleasure. So it's very positive. I mean, it's this amazingly positive mantra. And Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Oh, for our viewers out there, potential clients, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So that's Maha. The Sanskrit word Maha is great, from which we get the Latin Magna, as in Magna Carta, magnificent, everything. So Maha Mantra. And it's portable. You can take it across international borders. Has no moving.
The musical form too.
Yeah, no moving parts except your tongue. And yeah, it's great. You can just take it everywhere and just always keep yourself in yoga. So maybe we'll stop there. I'd like to thank you all. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
His Holiness Nityananda Maharaj is incredible pioneer. It's such a pleasure that he's right here at Bhakti Yoga Tempe. Mind, Body, Soul Institute. These are our founding I would say, because they've been coming for a while. And I don't need to be on
Because they always complain, like, we can't hear what he's saying.
Like your good looks, so listen.
So this is the
Like
Bhakti Yoga Tempe right across from Arizona State University. We're trying to please Srila Prabhupada, who has given us such an incredible gift of the ages, of the millennia for spiritual understanding, science of the soul. We have 50 to 70,000 kids across the street who desperately need it. They just don't know it. It's an onerous task. It's a huge task, but we go one soul at a time, one person at a time, and do our best to please Prabhupada and honor him. And we are so glad to have H.D.Goswami, who has done incredible service for Srila Prabhupada. He literally opened up South America, and he's just taken on every kind of format to challenge the atheists and the programmers, the deprogrammers, and everybody in between. Today, he's taking it worldwide in a format that may be more easy to receive. So we are so happy to have you. Wish you would come back again soon. We'll have a much better audience or collection of sadhu sangis here, or people who are interested in this serious topic with a little bit more notice.
Yes.
And I think we were lucky to have so many of us at a very, very short notice after a long holiday. Please come again. All right.
Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here in Facebook land, and we're sort of losing the connection, but thank you all very much for listening, and we'll see you soon.